All right, let's go. Share screen. Basic. Share. All right, let's go to present. All right. The Electoral College is what we're going to be learning about today. Now, before we get into it, we're going to be electing a new class mascot. Whatever we choose as our class mascot is going to get a poster on the door, and we will refer to them from time to time for class on assignment sheets and so on. But it's mostly inconsequential, but I want you guys to vote on it, all right? But we're going to vote on it in a very specific way. So you have two choices: Dog Broham Lincoln, George Whiskerton. Now I'm going to let you guys vote purely off of aesthetic choice with this. So what you're going to do is, with the numbers that I handed out to all of you, you're going to go to the group space with the number correlating to the one I handed out to you. So you guys are going to group according to those numbers. All right. Now you're going to vote amongst yourselves between our two candidates. Again, Dog Broham Lincoln, George Whiskerton. All right. And now once you guys finish voting within your group, I want one of you guys to write the votes down on a sheet so we have a clear representation of who was voted in your group. And one of you guys, the one of you with the alphabetical first name, is the elector. That means they're going to come to me with the vote sheet and show me the winner between your group, basically. And we'll go from there. All right, let's go. All right, now that I've given you guys a few minutes, you've probably all voted by now. Let's get a result. All right. I just got the last sheet in from the last group, and we are ready to fill out our map. Now, let's see. Okay, here's the sheet for front row hand. Okay. So it looks like they went for Whiskerton. Wow, okay. Now the Centralvanians, it appears, went for Dog Broham. And looks like Windowton's ballot, they also went for Dog Broham. And wow, East Windowton, Dog Broham again. Back corner stand, well, they went for Whiskerton. All right. So far, I'll just get the tally up so we can kind of keep track. It's 6 votes for Whiskerton and 13 votes for Dog Broham, but we forgot one district, Front Desk Square, my home district. There's only one resident, and that's your teacher, me. Oh, looks like my district swung it for Whiskerton. It's gonna put it up at 21. Okay. So we have our new class mascot. Totally fair, right? Now, what did everybody think about the process? Now, the last vote was kind of a joke. Dog Broham can be the mascot. My district will stay out of the election this time. So, but outside of that, what did everybody think? Did it seem overly complicated? Can anybody think of some different ways we could have done the election? Oh, a popular vote, Johnny. Yeah, lots of countries do that, and that is the more simple way to run an election, I suppose. But this is what we have, and let's look into it a little more. Okay, believe it or not, but the election we just had in class uses the same system our nation uses to elect the president. This type of system is called an electoral college. Now, I'd like to call on all of your prior knowledge for this. Has anybody heard of the electoral college or feel like they have some understanding of what it is? All right, Sally. Okay, it has to do with states voting. Yes, that's a good description of what the electoral college does. Let's get into exactly how that looks, though. All right, so you guys remember from last unit that the governing system in the United States is not a pure democracy. It is a constitutional federal republic. Now, in a democracy, you would have people vote on policy, and the policy would become law. However, the difference with a republic, if we remember from last unit, is that we vote for representatives who then choose to make the laws for us. They usually vote amongst themselves. So we are not directly voting. We are not directly in control of our own governance. We're in control of the people in control of us. Now, the electoral college is kind of like our legislation system with government, with laws. We vote for representatives who then vote on laws. Well, in the electoral college, just like voting for representatives, in our nation's presidential elections, in actuality, we're not so much voting directly for the candidate we mark on the ballot, but we're voting for electors who represent us. So your choice of president is what you mark on the ballot, but what you are really casting your vote for is what elector will be representing your state. So the electors themselves cast votes that determine the real result of the election. The election in November is when we mark ballots. The ballots select the electors, and then in December, the electors actually pick the president. So again, it's like an indirect system. It's like with our representatives. We are voting for people that represent us with these electors. And here I have a picture of some Arizona state electors. These are the electors have to be selected. They can't be like sitting on the state Congress or anything, but they are usually people kind of within the party of the party that wins the election, the state election. All right, I'll try to clear that up here. Okay, so after the people of the state cast their votes for president on election day, electors from the party that won the popular vote in that state meet up and cast their votes for the candidate. So that's the election in December when the electors meet up. The result sees all the electoral votes of that state awarded to the electors selected candidate. So if California votes and candidate A gets 51% of the votes and candidate B gets 49% of the votes, the party of candidate A will get to pick the electors, and they will pick entirely loyal electors to their party. And in the election on December, the electors will likely cast their votes for the same person that was voted by the people in November, even though they are really voting for the electors. Okay, so the number of electors, and by the extension, the electoral votes per state, is the same as the number of representatives that state has. So a minimum of 3. That means 2 senators and 1 House member. So remember, every state has a guaranteed 2 senators, but the House members are based off of that state's population, based off of districts, and it's roughly based on population. In some states, you have definitely a little bit. It's based on the census every 10 years, so it can be disproportionate with the amount of representatives representing the amount of people. Some states they represent like 700,000, other states a little less, a little more. So, but anyways, back to the electoral votes per state. It's the same as the state sends to Congress, both Senate and the House. So the number increases beyond 3 of however many House members. It's going to be 2 from Senate members and then X amount of House members. So California obviously is going to have much more than a small state like Alaska, because we have so many House members because of our large population. So we have 55 compared to their 3. Now, a good amount of states has 3. That is the minimum number for electoral votes. Okay, so this being the case, the president is selected by winning a national majority of votes. But by winning okay, I mean, the president is not selected by winning a national majority of votes. This is what makes the Electoral College different than just a normal popular vote. The president is selected by winning a combination of majorities in individual states that awards a majority of the electoral votes. So he only has to win by one vote in a state, and he gets all the electoral votes for that state. So the more majorities he wins, the more points he starts to stack up in his pile towards the Electoral College. So the votes themselves aren't what is counted up to win the election. The votes are counted up to get the state, and then the states, their electoral votes are counted up towards winning the election. So the presidential election can be thought of then as 51 mini elections, each of which having its own value towards the score of the election at large. So California is worth 55 points. It's like a mega touchdown, whereas states like Alaska or Wyoming, they're only a field goal at 3 points. All right. So most states employ the winner takes all system, where the winning party of that state's majority get to select all of the state's electors. However, there are two exceptions here. Maine and Nebraska are the only states that employ the district system, where one electoral vote is awarded to the presidential candidate who the popular vote in each congressional district, giving the potential for these states to have electoral votes given to multiple candidates. So these states are in Maine, for instance, one part of the state, one district of the state could vote for candidate A, and the other one could vote for candidate B, and their votes would be split between them. So there's obviously the election is divided by the states generally, but in these two states, it's divided one level far versus these districts. So they can award multiple electoral votes to different states. So if you've ever seen like an electoral map on the news and you see like Maine or Nebraska, sometimes they'll have red and blue stripes to show that they are awarding electoral votes to multiple different candidates. You'll see that from time to time. It is something to keep in mind. These aren't huge states, but they are a factor in this. Okay, so there are a total of 538 electoral votes possible. So let's count them up. 2 senators per state, that's 50 times 2, it's 100. And the House of Representatives, that's 435 total divided between all the states. And then there's an extra 3 for the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. So that way, obviously, they're not a state, but like 600,000 or so people live there. So they have more population than some states. So they want to say in the presidential election. So we give them the bare minimum 3 number that the smallest states get. So to win the presidency, a candidate has to have a simple majority. Now, simple majority means just more of a total than not of that. So it's not like 2/3 or 3/4. It's like if it's 100, then you only need 51 for a simple majority. So a simple majority, the 538 is 270 of these votes. So once you win enough states, a combination of states that gets you to 270, doesn't matter how much you win them by, just win these states, you pile up those electoral votes in the Electoral College to 270, you win the presidential election. All right, so the Electoral College has been a hotly debated topic of U.S. government from its conception. This was the framers weren't sure how we were going to elect our president. Originally, it was even less democratic. They just wanted to basically have government officials only pick it. They didn't even want to have a vote. But then they kind of eventually certain ones that are founding fathers actually did want a popular vote election, and this was the Electoral College was kind of a compromise. But in the first few elections up to like 1820 or so, there actually wasn't like a vote in every state. The state's representatives just picked their electors instead of picking the electors with a vote. There's still Electoral College, but the representatives just picked the electors in these very early elections, and then they voted in the December election to pick the president. But by the early 1800s, most states were holding a popular vote. So anyways, it's been very controversial though over years. There have been over 700 proposals to reform or eliminate the Electoral College. 700 that have been formally introduced to Congress. Like obviously there's probably, change.org petitions and stuff for, infinite amount of different instances, but even introduced to Congress 700. One of them did get very close in 1969, the Bly-Celler Amendment. It actually passed through the House of Representatives. President Nixon approved it, or basically gave his approval of it. But when it went to the Senate, it won a simple majority, but for an amendment, you can't just win a simple majority like you can for the Electoral College in general. You only need 51% or whatever, 50.1%. But you have to have like 3/4 vote from the Senate to make a new amendment to the Constitution. So even though more members of the Senate voted to get rid of the Electoral College and voted to keep it, we still keep it. It wasn't enough of a majority. So let's look into some of the reasoning why people might want to get rid of the Electoral College. This is important for you guys to be aware of because it is an ongoing national debate. And it does speak to the system itself to kind of understand some of its shortcomings, but we're also going to go over some of its advantages here shortly. So it's argued to be less directly democratic compared to a nationwide popular vote. This is pretty cut and dry. If we're talking about pure democracy again, some people like the idea of a pure democracy. Obviously, having just everybody vote for something is more purely democratic. This Electoral College is a little extra system on top of this. A lot of people don't like that. So U.S. citizens and territories are not given electors. These are not states, so there's no state electors to vote in the Electoral College. So these people can't vote in the presidential election. Yet they are U.S. citizens. Now, this might seem insignificant, but actually quite a few citizens live in the territories. In fact, 4.4 million, which is more than the bottom 6 least populated states combined. So that's a large amount of Americans who are left out of the Electoral College just by virtue of not being a state. So that's an issue with it. So the ways that electors are awarded means that, like with Congress, individual voters in some states are given disproportionately more representation than those in others. So think about it. If every state only gets 2 senators and 1 representative, right? So mathematically, a small state, they have at least 3 representatives to represent their population. They could have 1 person in their state. They'd still get 3. They don't have that few, but some of them do have like 500,000 instead of 40 million. Whereas the 2 senators, the larger your state gets, that's a disproportionately smaller amount of representation. Of course, you get more House members, so you're going to have more electoral votes total. But it ends up at the smallest state, each individual voter in that state, as far as their proportion of electoral votes, is about 3.6 times higher, that's Wyoming, than a voter in California's proportion of 1 electoral vote. So if you divide all the people in California by 55, and all the people in Wyoming by 3, the Californians are like 1/4 the size almost in their voting power per person. So it's a little unequal in who gets to participate as much as they do in this democracy with the voting in the Electoral College. So a candidate can still lose the election despite winning the popular vote. This has happened 4 times in U.S. history now, 2 times in my lifetime. So some people would like to see the presidential candidate with the most votes win, and the Electoral College certainly does not guarantee that. Okay, so many states, due to demographic and political trends, will be very predictable of the Electoral College. A lot of states, it's not really a question of who the electoral votes are going towards. So it's almost like the people who aren't voting that way might as well not show up for the presidential election. They should still vote on their local things, which we'll get into in another unit. But um, it can be very predictable, and that kind of leaves it up to a handful of battleground states that actually are close that will ultimately decide the election. And that also means that, if California is 60% one way and it's, a solid 10% margin, but then you have another state that's like a 1% margin, the candidates probably won't come and campaign in California because it's a waste of their time. They want to try to swing that 1%, which will actually determine which way the election goes, because probably the majority of states, most elections are kind of set in stone which way they're going to vote. Now, reasoning for the Electoral College. It is in accordance with our nation's system of federalism. Does anybody remember that from one of our earlier units in the year? Oh, Mary, yes. Federalism, yeah, keep going, is when you have division of power, right? You have division of power between a federal, a national, state, and local government. So they hold each other accountable. Not one has complete control of the other. They all have varying inputs towards each other. So the Electoral College, of course, allows state power to have some effect on the federal government. The president's, part of the federal government. The states have some power over him, and that they help select him. So it's in accordance with our governing system of federalism. So it also favors states with high population, but allows smaller states to matter. Obviously, California and Texas have the most electoral votes because they are the biggest states, and that's probably the way it should be. But a place like Wyoming or South Dakota, they still, 3 electoral votes, that's still like, within almost 1% of what the Electoral College is. So even though they're nowhere near 1% of the population. So, getting those states does matter for winning the election. Now, if it was just by popular vote, the votes in South Dakota or Wyoming would be almost meaningless, but these individual states now do matter in the context of the Electoral College, and that can help people pay attention to them. They all have their own individual problems and needs and stuff, so it is good to focus some attention on those states. So the electors are well equipped to make sudden corrections if a dire situation were to emerge. All right, so it's very possible that a president could die the day after being elected. Now, if you just had a popular vote to select them, picking the replacement is going to probably be kind of an ugly process because you don't really have an alternative. But the electors meeting in December in our Electoral College, they can easily, because these are people that are loyal to the party that won, and loyal to the candidate that won, so they can make the most appropriate selection possible. Or, say the person who won the presidential election all of a sudden murdered someone the next day, or was found to be so corrupt that you can't let them be president at this point. If they just won a popular vote, it might be kind of hard to reverse that decision. But the electors can easily not end up actually casting the real votes for him in December, even though we all cast our votes for them in November. Now, the electors are not required to vote for the person who wins the popular vote in each state. So that's one reason a lot of people don't like the Electoral College, but it does have this benefit. And sometimes actually electors they're called faithless electors, have not voted for the candidate that the state selected. This has happened, I think, 80 something times in history, like an individual elector, 80 separate times. I think like 60 of them all happened in one case with a vice president who died. And a couple times it's been to make a statement, but this has never swung the result of an election. And usually it's seen as something if it's only acceptable to do if it's not going to swing the result of election. So our votes still are indirectly picking the presidents, even though the electors by the Constitution are not bound to follow what the people picked. But anyways, getting off that tangent, decisive outcomes, okay, margins of victory in electoral college elections tend to be larger than for popular vote elections. You could win, a 60-40 popular vote in an electoral college, but that electoral map is probably going to be like nearly 40 states to 10 or something often for an election that's that wide. So it kind of, it helps people get behind the new president when they're able to win by a larger amount. But this also makes it, if it were ever really close, it makes it easier to count. Like, think about like state recounts, like in Florida, it can get really gnarly if it's really close. Now, if it was ever really close in a popular vote over our entire country, the recounts would probably be a really daunting process. The Electoral College compartmentalizes this, meaning puts it in small boxes that can be dealt with individually, and we can't have that big mess with it. So that maybe is a benefit of the Electoral College. So it prevents a tyranny of the majority. Now, a tyranny of the majority, we did go over earlier this year, is seen to be a fundamental shortcoming of democracy, where the 51% has unlimited influence and control over the 49% that didn't win the democratic election. But you can have certain things in place to make sure that doesn't happen, to make sure that the majority doesn't oppress the minority. And one of that ways is to give minorities, so in this case the minority of the popular vote, the ability to be competitive with a larger majority, so they can kind of protect themselves from having to completely be controlled just because they fall on one side of what is often basically half and half, but it skews a little one way or another. So it makes for power to not be so obvious to which way it's going to go. So candidates have to campaign in a variety of areas with the Electoral College. Is another seen advantage. Now, the problem with a popular vote is probably all the focus would be done in the major population centers, the New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago metropolitan areas, various other metropolitan areas. If you did your job to get, these very densely populated areas to vote for you, because most people in our country do live in some version of an urban area. So if you can get like the urban vote, you'd win the election. But with the Electoral College, our battleground states are all over the place. There are places like Iowa, Pennsylvania, Florida, Ohio, Arizona, Nevada. It's like these are very different places, and it requires that they don't go to all the states, but they do want to go to these battleground states if they want to win the election. It gets them to places they wouldn't necessarily go to as candidates. So that is one potential benefit. So what the Electoral College has accomplished is a successful democratic transition of power for well over 200 years. Now, it's the only country in the world that can say that right now. There are no other democracies that have managed to have this transfer of power for as long as we have. So it has worked up to this point. And if you took my sophomore world history class, you know that successful transition of power is nothing to laugh at. That isn't easy to come by in history, and we've done it for well over 200 years now. So it has worked in doing the job it was meant to do. That doesn't mean something else couldn't have necessarily, but many failings, of course, exist in world history, and the Electoral College has been successful in transitioning to powers. And Civil War, however, is somewhat based on people not being very happy about a certain election result, but he did stay in power. He did end up keeping the country together. That, of course, is our great president Abraham Lincoln. So, okay, your activity now for the end of class is the cooperative drawing activity. So with the people in your states, the groups that you guys voted and stuff, I want everybody to start their own drawing on the large piece of paper I got you guys out today with the variety of felt markers. Now you will start to draw an illustrated model of the Electoral College. After 2 minutes, you will pass your drawing to the next person to add to it, repeating until it has gone around the entire group. Limit 1 word per turn. Afterward, vote on the collaborative drawing that best depicts the Electoral College. Your group will present it to the class on the projector, whichever one you pick ended up representing it. All right, let's go, guys. All right, switch partners, switch to the next person in your group. Okay, 2 minutes again, let's go. Okay, all right, is that last person everybody's got each one once? This is, all right, good, okay. So this was kind of like a game of telephone, right? You guys, maybe some of them got a little funky because of like miscommunications and stuff, but you can see where things went wrong, and hopefully you guys got a chance to talk over in that brief minute there about what you meant with this and that. But hopefully one or two of them maybe did end up representing the Electoral College pretty well. So let's see some of those. Oh, yeah, that's a very good one right there. Yeah, nice. All right. Okay, for next week, be ready to create a finalized version of the Electoral College illustrated model that you will work on and turn in individually. Hopefully now you kind of understand what works and what doesn't and have some ideas. I don't mind if a lot of you guys end up being the same if you think one way is just more efficient than others, but I want you guys to be able to visually represent this process. I'll give you a good 20, 30 minutes to work on this. So sounds good. So see you guys next class. Now remember, I will probably have something about, this was the Electoral College ended up being a whole day's lesson, so there'll probably be a question on our next test. And I may even ask some opinions from you guys. So maybe you want to take something from the advantages or disadvantages to argue whether we should keep it or not. So that's just a hint of what might be on the test when it comes to the Electoral College. All right, class, see you later.